for the final panel today is entitled Industry Leadership, What Should the Commission Consider? And today we have 4 members of the panel. Alan Foreman is Chairman and the Chief Executive Officer of the Thoroughbred Horsemen's Associations Incorporated, which represents more than 20,000 owners and trainers throughout the United States. Alan is a founding director of the National Thoroughbred Racing Association and currently serves on its board of directors and audit and compensation committee. Ed Martin serves as the president of the Association of Racing Commissioners International, which is an organization composed of the governmental regulators of horse and greyhound racing in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Martin came to ARCI following extensive service as executive director of the New York State Racing and Wagering Board. On video today, we have Bill Nader. Thank you for participating at the early morning there. Mr. Nader has been the executive director of racing at the Hong Kong Jockey Club since April of 2007 and serves as its member of the management board. Before going to Hong Kong, Mr. Nader served as a chief operating officer and senior vice president at the New York Racing Association. Finally, we have Alex Walbro, who is the president and the chief executive officer of the National Thoroughbred Racing Association. Founded in 1998, the NTRA is a membership-based trade organization for thoroughbred racing and breeding industry. Mr. Waldrop, a former president of Churchill Downs, came to the NTRA from the law firm of Wyatt, Tarrant, and Combs, where he chaired the Equine Gaming and Entertainment Practice Group. As with the previous panel, if anyone has any opening remarks or things that they want to have considered initially, please feel free to start. If not, we'll go to the members of the commission for their discussion.
Well, I have prepared some. I have prepared some remarks because I'm here today as the president of the NTRA, but also, perhaps more importantly, as the chairman of the board of directors of the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium. The RMTC, as we call it, is a science-based, industry-led organization with a mission to develop and promote and coordinate at the national level drug and therapeutic medication rules, policies, research, and educational programs, all with the intent of ensuring the integrity of racing and the safety and welfare of racehorses. You may be aware that in 2011, the U.S. horse racing industry undertook an exhaustive evaluation of the use of medications on race day. The RMTC, together with the NTRA and the American Association of Equine Practitioners, organized an international summit at Belmont Park to address race day medication, including the race day use of medications to treat exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhaging, or EIPH, in the racehorse. I think I've just been cut off. Based upon information, very much similar to what you're doing today, based upon the information that we gleaned from the summit, the RMTC's board created 4 subcommittees. We populated those committees with industry experts, and with the intent to explore potential changes to the regulation of all race day medications in horse racing. We decided that Lasix, the use of Lasix, had to be evaluated in the context of all medications in racing. One committee was the furosemide restriction committee, or the Lasix restriction committee. The goal of that committee, which I chaired, was to find ways to more carefully regulate the use of furosemide on race day and to eliminate the use of so-called adjunct bleeder medications, which were prevalent at the time throughout racing in America. The committee concluded that furosemide should be the only medication authorized for administration on race day, and it should be strictly limited to being administered no less than 4 hours prior to post time. The committee also concluded that to eliminate adjuncts and to more carefully regulate Lasix administration, the administration of furosemide should be performed only by third-party veterinarians, or vet techs, who are prohibited from working as private veterinarians on the racetrack. The model for this recommendation was from the New York Racing Association, which had, at the time, been utilizing third-party administration successfully for quite some time. These furosemide restrictions were added to the RCI model rules and it then became part of the National Uniform Medication Program that you're a part of, and that have been adopted now in 16 jurisdictions so far. There was a second committee formed by the RMTC after that summit. It was called, I'll call it the Medication Rules and Penalties Committee. This committee was chaired by Alan Foreman, who's on my left. It greatly enhanced the move toward uniformity in medication regulation in the U.S. First, that committee championed the development of a list of medications recognized as necessary for the treatment of illness or injury in the horse on a routine basis. This list that we now know as the Controlled Therapeutic Substances Schedule sets forth thresholds for 26 medications, including Lasix. The schedule has been added to the RCI model rules, again, it's part of the National Uniform Medication Program, adopted in 17 jurisdictions, including New York. Now, the Penalty Committee also developed what's become known as the Multiple Medication Violation Penalty System, which provides for suspensions above and beyond underlying penalties for those with multiple medication violations. This system, which has also been added to the RCI model rules and is now part of the National Uniform Medication Program, has been adopted in 10 jurisdictions, and it's currently under consideration here in New York. There was a third committee created. This was called the Security Committee, which Dr. Palmer chaired. The goal of that committee was to determine what security issues need to be addressed, whether Lasix administered by third parties or eliminated altogether. That committee, again, chaired by Dr. Palmer, recommended heightened security on the backstretch, cameras, increased personnel, basically boots on the ground, veterinary ride-alongs, most of which have been incorporated into the third-party administration program, part of the model rules, of which you are a very active participant. The final committee was what we call the Lasix Phase-Out Committee, which was asked to explore the potential for phasing out Lasix from U.S. racing altogether. Several recommendations came out of the committee's work, including the consideration of a nationwide Lasix phase-out starting with 2-year-olds. However, the necessary pilot project involving 2-year-olds was abandoned due to scientific and other restrictions and concerns. Other recommendations for phase-outs suffered similar fates. However, Lasix-free racing continues to this day, and that was an idea that grew out of our meeting in 2011. One final point about research. Be aware that the RMTC has its own scientific advisory committee, and that committee is available to you. Dr. Palmer serves on that committee, and it's always available to you to help guide you in whatever research that you would undertake. I commend you today because you've already listened to the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine Specialists and their consensus statement that was issued in March. It's probably the definitive statement at this point in time on the science of EIPH. From the RMTC perspective, we make note of the fact that in that statement they acknowledge that currently Lasix is the only viable treatment for EIPH. They also encourage continued scientific medical research into alternatives to the race day administration of Lasix. And I think that's an important recommendation for all of us in the United States to consider. In conclusion, regardless of what this board decides to pursue regarding furosemide, I urge you to fully adopt the 4 aspects of the National Uniform Medication Program. You still need to finish the MMV. You need to complete the RMTC accreditation of your lab, which is very much underway. And you do need to add a couple of medications, which you're in the process of doing, to your schedule, your CTS schedule, Controlled Therapeutic Substances Schedule, isoflupridone, it's close, and albuterol. We urge this board to take full advantage of all aspects of the National Uniform Medication Program and make all of these issues your top priority, including Lasix. Thank you very much.
Commissioners, I feel your pain. Almost 20 years ago, I came to work at the New York Racing and Wagering Board, and people started talking to me about Lasix, and I don't know what the heck they were talking about. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a veterinarian. I'm prohibited by contract and previously by public officers' law from owning horses. But my dad taught me, growing up on Long Island, know what you know and know what you don't know. See this cup? If it had something in it, and it was up to where that line is, that cup is either half full or half empty. And that explains the difference that we're looking at with Lasix. The regulators who I represent, your colleagues, kind of reopened this issue in 2011 when the then chairman of the Ohio State Racing Commission called for a revisiting of the Lasix policy. And that started an interesting dynamic, because the fact that we were willing, as you are today, to take a good hard look at a public policy and whether it still is appropriate given the information that you know and have at your availability. There was a lot of things being said, just as you had a lot of things being said here today. And you try to sort through as to what's real, what's opinion, what makes sense. We're talking about an almost 30-year public policy that came into effect as an equine welfare policy. And the minute we decided that we were going to take a new look at it, next thing you know, there were websites popping up and advocacy programs. We were like the hero of part of the industry. And we looked at it. The industry did the forum that Alex just talked about. The Racing Medication and Testing Consortium, which is a public-private partnership of industry and regulatory personnel, get together, try to look at these issues and make recommendations to the ARCI, which then vets it from a regulatory point of view in the adoption of a model rule, and then we hand it out to the commissions with the hope that this is what we believe to be the best regulatory practice, and urge you to adopt it. At the end of the review, we had a meeting kind of like this in 2011 in July in Saratoga. And Dr. Palmer was actually representing the American Association of Equine Practitioners Racing Commission at that time, committee at that time. And we brought in Dr. Robinson from Michigan, who was alluded to in Dr. Sweeney's presentation this morning as being one of the world's renowned experts on pulmonary airway disease in horses. And we had some of the same people who spoke today speak at that forum. Then we asked our regulatory veterinarians group to conduct a complete literature search of all the literature that's out there. And what we were concerned with is that if you were going to change a 30-year public policy position, you needed some degree of science. You needed some degree of proof that this was having a detrimental effect on the health and the welfare of the horse. And our equine veterinarian group looked at that. They did literature search, and they came back and they reported to our board that it wasn't there. And I'm not sure anything's changed that much between then and now, other than the fact that you've got the American Veterinary College of Internal Medicine issued a consensus paper this year on EIPH. And Commissioner Machete, I got hung up on that question of is it a disease, or at what level is it a disease, and whether it is high quality evidence, medium quality evidence, or low quality evidence. But what I learned as I'm reading through and read that paper, and I'm just a simple guy, is there evidence, a lot of it, a little bit, some of it, high quality, low quality? I don't know what those words mean. When you're dealing with some of that stuff, it's a different language. What we got out of that statement is, number one, the word progressive. Number two, it can lead, if untreated, to more serious potential conditions, even though they may be small. And one of the things that we looked at in 2011 was, if you're giving an administration of Lasix to a horse that might not medically require it, are you hurting that horse in any way, shape, or form? And the answer we reached, and I think you're struggling to reach as well, is no. Matter of fact, there was somebody who, and I won't mention this individual's name, but I pulled them aside after our meeting and I says, what's the bottom line on this stuff? And this individual said, the bottom line is this. Lasix helps the horse. The horse might be fine without it. And in the end of the day, racing will survive either way. But we also heard that there are some horses that health-wise might be better if they were treated with Lasix. Now, in my humble corner of the world, this issue, and our board of regulators who make up the board of the ARCI are unanimous on this. We do not believe that equine medication policy should be politicized, period. But when the ARCI didn't change the Lasix policy, all of a sudden federal bills started popping up. And now there's a couple of federal bills out there that would like to fire you guys and my members, and they think that that's going to somehow make it different. But we also represent, it's fascinating some of the concepts that come forward. We represent the Canadian system, where you have a federal agency that sets the medication policy and does all the drug testing, and it balances them with the provincial racing, state and provincial racing commissions. And at the end of the day, the drug testing results are the same as they are whether they're done individually by the states in the U.S. They have a funding mechanism that comes off an assessment on handle. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Lasix. But how you look at the people who use Lasix determines, and how you talk about this issue, determines what the public starts to think about it. We have heroes in our sport. For instance, American Pharoah ran on Lasix. Mr. Phipps runs 85% of his horses on Lasix. One of the world's outspoken opponents of it. Mr. Janney runs 80% of his horses on Lasix. Mr. Hancock runs 78% of his horses on Lasix. The prominent racing members of the Water Hay Oats Alliance are running their horses on it. Now you can look at what they do one of two ways. Took race day precaution to protect the horse, or used performance enhancement. And how you talk about this issue affects how people think of this sport. The politics of this have overtaken the substance. And it's unfortunate because it is a self-inflicted wound. At the end of the day, the horse has got to come first. Racing industry is second. But this issue may be more about money for some than it is about anything else. And I don't blame the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency for wanting to get involved in horse racing. It's a $14 million operation. They're talking about, we do collectively 37 times more drug testing than they do. You're talking about taking an $14 million agency and maybe ballooning it up to about a $70 or $80 million agency if you can get a bill through Congress. So it may be about money. When you look at the results of the testing that's done in the various different sports, it is comparable. Now, Mr. Hancock talked about out-of-competition testing. There's a different regulatory scheme in human sport because they regulate the therapeutic medications that people are allowed to use in training. So out-of-competition testing is an important part of it. We are in favor of out-of-competition testing. We have found, and they do about 60% of their out-of-competition testing, at least the USADA folks do. By the way, in 2014, they picked up one EPO. Their detection rate is is pretty much the same as racing's, is pretty much the same as all the rest of the World Anti-Doping Agency. The labs are equally accredited to IS international standards. Is there a uniformity issue? I think you need to look at uniformity in racing this way. Performance-enhancing drugs are not allowed, period. Where you have instances of non-uniformity, it is a difference of opinion as to whether or not the administration of a normal and appropriate therapeutic medication should stop 48 hours out, 72 hours out, or 36 hours out. You're talking relatively minor differences. But performance-enhancing drugs are not allowed. And there's total uniformity on that. So we can focus on a tree, or we can focus on the forest. But if this sport is going to successfully compete for the entertainment dollar with any other sport, then we ought to think about how we talk about this sport. When the NFL had a domestic abuse problem, did they run around and lament about every athlete who might have done something they shouldn't have done? No, they went on the affirmative. So I just share this with you from an old regulator and the guy who works with the regulators. We need help. We all do. Whether it's the New York Gaming Commission, the California Horse Racing Board, the Kentucky Racing Commission. But Lasix is not the integrity issue. It isn't even an issue dealing with the breakdown problem that we need to address. And you've taken wonderful steps here in New York. I wish you had somebody like Dr. Palmer when I was working for the state. This issue has gotten way out of control, and it's a complicated issue on many levels. But at the end of the day, if you don't believe in it, you don't have to use it. Maybe somebody needs to come up with some non-Lasix racing opportunities for those people who absolutely don't believe in it and feel it's hurting the value of their blood stock. And then the real legitimate question is, is that something that they negotiate directly with the track and the horsemen's groups, or they need to get government involved in that? But it's an equine welfare policy. It was when it came in, and it still is today.
Can you get Nader on the line? Absolutely. Bill? Maybe not.
Bill, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Great. We'd like you to come on next if you don't mind. We realize we kept you up or either got you up or got you up for quite a long time here. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, I think it was about 20 years ago, almost to the day, when Lasix was approved in New York. It was approved at a time, I was working at NYRA in 1995, and I say this just to bring everybody back to remember how it came into New York, at a time when Kenny Noe was the CEO and just before the 1995 Breeders' Cup, and the implementation date was the 1st of September. Now, back then, and many of you probably remember, the majority of horses competing in New York did not race on Lasix at the time. But things have changed dramatically now that it seems that every horse, including first-time starters, are administered Lasix on race day. So it's changed quite a bit in the 20 years. And during that transition in 1995, there was, Ed spoke about American Pharaoh, but there was also another great horse back then during the time of that transition named Cigar, who won the NYRA Mile in 1994. It was a field of 12, a Grade 1 race. He won it by 7 lengths without Lasix. But most of his success during that incredible run, 16 consecutive victories, was with Lasix. But probably his greatest victory in 1996 was in Dubai, in the Dubai World Cup, and of course he won that without Lasix. So the point I'm trying to make here is, I think we have to go back to before 1995. There was no Lasix in New York. There were a lot of great horses then that competed and did great things without Lasix. And now, to Ed's point, with his father said, know what you know and know what you don't know. I've moved on to Hong Kong, and I've been here for over 8 years. Now, coming here has been a bit of an eye-opener for me, because I was in New York from '94 to 2007, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of that Lasix was administered in racing, and that was the racing that I knew in New York. Now you come to Hong Kong, and some people say, and I've heard this before, that you can't compare Hong Kong to America, but the environment here in Hong Kong, when you look at how horses are trained, it's very, very similar to the United States. I mean, horses are trained here primarily on a dirt track. They're all stabled at one place at Sha Tin. So it's not Europe where it's a whole different environment. It's very, very similar to the United States. And when you look at the climate here, it's very hot and very humid. And at times in the winter it can be cold and dry, so there can be drastic changes in the climate. When you look at air pollution in Hong Kong, many people would agree that it's severe. So this is a very unfriendly environment for the respiratory tract. And yet Hong Kong horses have achieved great things without Lasix. When you look at the world's top 25 Group 1 races, Hong Kong has 4, which is second only to the UK. And you can't achieve that success in terms of race ratings unless you have the horses to earn those ratings. Hong Kong has those horses. So when you say know what you know and know what you don't know, and I too am not a scientist, I come back to the point that it's eye-opening to see how it works in Hong Kong. Now here, as it's been mentioned earlier, that Lasix is banned for both training and racing. In other countries, it's available in training, but not in racing. But here, in an environment that would be considered very challenging and probably more difficult than that in America, in a scenario where horses are trained very similar to they would be in America, nobody even thinks about it. It's not even talked about. No one comes up and ever mentions the idea that Lasix should be part of the landscape. So there was a time in New York, and New York was the last state to approve Lasix, and I remember having been there at the time. It seemed to be a very difficult decision in 1995 to sign on. So when you look back and you think pre-1995, and I look to my 8 years in Hong Kong and see how racing is very successful here without Lasix, I think everyone has to kind of step back and think, is it really necessary? And I think to the point of the usage rate that, I do think most people perceive it to be an advantage. And as long as it's going to be permissible on race day, they're going to use it. If it's not, it's a different equation. When you look at the durability of horses in America, and you look at the average starts per horse, and I'm not pinning this on Lasix, but it's just, again, part of the equation. In 1960, it was 11.3 starts per horse per year. Now it's just a shade over 6. And it seems very clear that it takes longer for horses to recover and come back and run. In Hong Kong, I can tell you, there's no Lasix, and horses routinely come back in 2 to 3 weeks and compete at a very high level. So again, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not drawing any firm conclusion from that, but it's just fact. It's just very visible and very clear that top horses, ordinary horses, it doesn't matter. They can come back within 2 to 3 weeks and still run at a peak level of performance. So for me, maybe my view would be different had I not come here and seen a different way of racing life. In America, people, it seems they don't blink that all horses are on Lasix because that's what they know. But in the rest of the world, when you take out North America, horses are free of medication on race day. That's a basic principle, a basic policy, and one that I now believe in, and I believe that's the way it should be.
Alan?
Good afternoon. I've been sitting listening as you have today, and I guess the difference is I've heard this before, and I've been in the middle of this debate now for the past 5 or 6 years, and probably for more than 20 years. And I don't think that there's anything that I could say at this point in the proceeding that's going to unconfuse you, make you more confused, or change, quite frankly, your perceptions on this issue. I quite frankly think that Lasix is a red herring. It's not about Lasix. It's about the fact that we administer a medication on a race day for the benefit of our horses, and that may still be misunderstood, may be misrepresented, depending upon which side of the issue you're on. But that really is the issue. The fact that we're giving a medication to a horse on race day. If we were administering Lasix outside of 24 hours, nobody would be talking about this, just like we do with the other medications. The only thing I think I can bring to the conversation maybe is a little bit of historical perspective. I've been in the business now since 1975. When Lasix was legalized, it was seen as a breakthrough. Owners were excited, trainers were excited because of the difficulty they had with managing horses that bleed. And it was something that moved across the country, not at a very quick pace, but at a very slow pace, and it was largely unregulated. Bill Nader is correct. I think it was around 1995 when New York finally joined the bandwagon, and New York did so because it had trouble getting horses, and its handle was down. The betting public didn't like it. They had trouble getting horses. The trainers were still having to deal with the phenomenon of bleeding in horses, and other states were dealing with that with the use of Lasix. And for quite some period of time, there was no conversation at all publicly about Lasix or what Lasix might be doing to the industry or otherwise. As that period of time proceeded, we dealt with a couple of things. One is this masking issue, and I did want to address it because it was brought up. Lasix, in its purest sense, does have the ability to mask the presence of other drugs. And that's why we have the strict regulatory scheme that we do. We not only look at urine through specific gravity, but we do post-race analysis of blood samples to ensure that samples have not been compromised. And that was something that was pioneered by Dr. Malin here in New York, working with Tom Lomangino, who was the director of the Maryland laboratory, and they developed the test and the protocol that is now in place to ensure compliance with our regulatory scheme. So I think that in all the panels that have appeared today, there's been nobody here from a laboratory. I think the laboratory directors would tell you that masking is a non-issue. It's not an issue. Those who are out there, and I read recently the Humane Society suggesting that we're doping horses and that we're masking the presence of other drugs, that simply is a false statement, and I wish somebody from the laboratories other than me was here to make that statement. The other thing we did was we tried to be transparent about it. That's why the L is on the program. That's why there's a description in the program as to why horses get Lasix and what it's given for. That's done for a purpose. It's to let the betting public and the public know what we're doing with these horses and why we're doing it. If we were trying to do something nefarious, why in God's name would we disclose it on the program? The bettors take it into account. The bettors like it. The bettors like the fact that we're dealing with a level playing field. In the late 1990s, when the NTRA was formed, the NTRA decided that one of the things that it wanted to tackle was integrity in racing, and the same arguments you hear today about drugs, you heard back in the late 1990s if you didn't hear it before that. And so the NTRA embarked on a super drug test program to determine whether, at least at the time, our laboratories were not doing their jobs properly and what we could be doing from an integrity standpoint. And one of the recommendations from that study was to create a consortium of experts and industry organizations to referee these medication disputes and to advise the industry on a scientific basis. as to how we should proceed. And from the report of that summit in 2001 were the following points of consensus. Any medication policy must take into consideration the integrity of horse racing, the health and welfare of the horse, the long-term interests of the breeds, and the safety of the rider and driver. That was the first point of consensus. Secondly, a national advisory body should be created to address the development of medication policies and practices. And with respect to medication specifically, furosemide is the only medication to be administered on race day. Any changes in this policy should be supported by sound scientific principles with the health and welfare of the horse and integrity of racing as the prime considerations. And that's what the THA, the organization that I represent, owners and trainers who testified here today, throughout the region, the Horsemen's Benevolent Protective Association representatives who are here, they represent more than 50,000 owners and trainers throughout the country, and the thoroughbred owners of California, who also interact with us and represent the owners and trainers of California. That's what we're committed to, and that's what we've been at the table doing. Making policy based on sound scientific principles and doing what we all believe is in the best interest of our sport and the integrity of our sport. And that has motivated us since day one. We attended the summit that Alex and Dr. Palmer helped to host in 2011. Unfortunately, nothing has changed since that summit. We haven't really learned much more, and quite frankly, we haven't done much more about it. And therein lies the problem. How are we going to get out of this? How are we going to stop this polarizing debate? How are we going to do right by the horse, and how are we going to do right by the industry without a major shift in policy that's going to have, quite frankly, very negative consequences on our business if we don't do it intelligently? And the answer is, and I think you heard it from the scientific experts and from the veterinarians and from the owners and trainers, we have work to do. We need to find an alternative to Lasix. It's the best option we have to deal with this phenomenon, and we need to find a way, if it's possible to do so, an alternative. There was a meeting in New York in June of 2013 to address this very issue. We identified research priorities, but we haven't done anything about it. I want you to know, and I want the industry to know, that we are prepared to put our financial resources, and we are prepared to work with the scientific community to find those alternatives. And that's the direction that I sincerely hope we go in. In the meantime, we have embarked on, and New York is certainly has signed on to this uniform effort, this uniform program that is being adopted throughout the country. We had a meeting last month in Delaware of 8 jurisdictions, the entire Mid-Atlantic, on this uniform program, and I wish everybody could see how the region is interacting with New York at the table, and now the rest of the country is interacting on these medication issues. I know you're out of time.
I have to run. How big is the market for Lasix?
How big is the market
Yes,
nationally?
Lasix is sold, yeah.
Well, take the number of starts times 25. There's a starting
You guys
point.
do this. I mean, can someone come up with an estimate?
Oh, I'm
I
sure.
asked the group before. I think if you're looking to define what the opportunity is in a new drug, understanding what that would be worth would be helpful.
I
I mean, if you don't have the answer now, no one else sees.
Well, I say the starting point is loosely take the number of starts, and assuming that most, if not all, of the horses are getting Lasix with their starts, times 25, whatever the charge is, that certainly gives you at least a starting point of the cost, and that doesn't take into consideration training. The problem is getting the pharmaceutical companies and those willing to do the research, willing to do the work, because we are, as I think one of the previous panelists said, we're a small market. We're a small cog in all of this.
We say that, but I don't know what that means.
I got a really rough estimate.
Right.
There are 96,000 horse races in the U.S. every year. If you assume 6.5 starters per race, you're looking at, is that a right number? I use 6. So you're at national, but I'm looking at a national number.
Okay.
Talking all
I'm talking about 15,600,000.
And that doesn't count training.
And that doesn't count training?
That doesn't count training. That's
So
just
the group here,
$25
It's not
Lasix.
this group, the training before, like, you could say what it is in New York.
Yeah.
It'd be helpful to sort of understand the scope. I mean,
If Scott Hay can give us that, Dr. Palmer, as the head of the racing committee of the AEP.
Do the math on it. It's not a hard thing.
Yeah, you've got a list of starters.
You know, the shame of it is if you took the money that's being put into this federal effort and all these things that are going on both sides, lobbyists, you name it, and put it into research with the support of these organizations, that would help to move this industry forward. I mean, I agree with the half full, half empty argument. There's a side that says that everything's half full. I'm on the half empty. I'm on the side that says it's half full. You could certainly promote the reforms that we're doing and tell a certainly different story if you wanted to. We're doing the work. There are people in the media who want to marginalize what we're doing and don't want to tell the story. But if you put all that money together, it certainly would go a long way towards helping to solve this problem.
You know,
I hate to leave early. I have to go. Okay.
one last thought. If every horse in the race is running on Lasix, somebody else said it, which one's got the advantage?
Let me step in for a moment and tell you how big the market is in Hong Kong, because I've said it already. There is no market. If a horse bleeds in Hong Kong, there's a compulsory 3-month ban from racing. If he bleeds a second time, it's either compulsory retirement or another 3-month ban from racing. If he bleeds a third time, it's a compulsory retirement. On average, there are 13 retirements per year. We have 777 races. Ed can give you the number of starters on this. And we average 12.6 runners per race, not 6.5. 12.6 per race. 777 races. No Lasix for training. No Lasix for racing. 3-month ban for a first bleed. 3-month ban for a second bleed. If a horse bleeds for a third time, compulsory retirement. We have 13 retirements a year. That's it. There's no market.
It's $27 to start.
Thoroughbred or Auburn? Thoroughbred.
So is the answer EIPH, is it a non-pharmaceutical answer? You know, when you say you need money on development of another pharmaceutical, right? Yeah. There are those out there, and we hear this, that say, well, that's not the alternative. There are some that say, maybe this is what Bill's saying, it's a breeding issue. I don't know scientifically if there's empirical evidence of that. I don't, but we're hearing that. So I just throw that out there. Is that you see the 2-year-old filly that Gary Contessa put up there that's bleeding now. Horses are big animals, right? 1,000 pounds plus, 900 pounds. When they bleed, they bleed. I mean, so when it comes out, it looks very dramatic. There are those that would look at it and say, all right, so for that filly's career, for that horse's career, maybe racing is not what the horse should be doing. Maybe you should go over to the hunter and jump over or something. So, I mean, I throw that out there because I think there are some that think, all right, so maybe a pharmaceutical resolution is not the answer. But I don't know if one is.
I would offer the observation, it was interesting to listen to the research earlier today. Virtually every one of the researchers, the scientists, asked for more data on the existing Lasix and its efficacy. I think it's time to seriously consider a moratorium on that data and shift that focus, those resources and our attention to a cure or elimination, whatever, be it pharmaceutical or non. I think it's time to focus our attention in that direction. I'm not sure anybody is doing more research, but to the extent that we can, I think the effort and approach needs to be for a solution to the problem that's not Lasix.
Earlier today, you heard about an AEP prescription for racing that was publicized in the Jockey Club Roundtable. And one of the points in that was the AEP is holding a seminar in the fall, chaired by Nat White, who's chairman of the research committee. And the purpose of that is a basic call for proposals for alternatives to treating EIP with Lasix. So the AEP is willing to fund that through our foundation, and we may be looking for other money as well. But I can tell you that that process is in play, and it'll happen this fall.
That's excellent.
Your colleague regulators, without exception, don't like the concept of anything being given to a horse on race day. The struggle that we had was it's a 30-year-old equine welfare policy, and we applaud what the AAP is doing. And I know I speak for pretty much most of our members on this. If there were a non-race day alternative to treat EIPH, I think that might change the dynamics of this debate. But as of right now, it didn't exist in 2011. It doesn't exist in 2015 yet.
Yeah, I think we would. I think we all agree with that. I don't think there's any debate about it.
And I would also say that any horseman's representative, sometimes people like to draw lines between, good guys and bad guys and imply that the horseman's representatives are somehow not on the side of the angels. But any horseman's representative that I've talked to over these years, if there were scientific evidence that this was hurting the horse in any way, shape, or form, they'd run from it.
I think I've got to ask one question from my view here. I mean, whether the rest of the world applies to this discussion or not, I don't know. Places like Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, really the rest of the world outside of North America lives by the basic principle a horse must be free of medication on race day. Now, when you look, again, I come back to the climate, which is in terms of the respiratory tract, it's not a friendly climate in Dubai. It's not a friendly climate in Singapore, nor is it one in Hong Kong. And yet, we live and race by that basic principle. And again, nobody discusses the use of Lasix or the need for Lasix on race day. So whether that enters into it or not, as we look at different studies and explore a different avenue. If you look outside of the borders of our country in America and see that the rest of the racing world is living and racing without any medication on race day, and it's very effective, certainly very effective in, when you look at the climate in Singapore and Hong Kong, and we look at the quality of the product in Hong Kong particularly, if that applies to this discussion or not, to me it does. To me, it's very clear that it does, because I'm living in a place here. It's just a small place. There's only 1,200 horses here. They're all stabled at one place at Sha Tin. They're all training on a dirt oval every morning, just like they would be at Belmont Aqueduct or Saratoga. They're competing in a place that's known for severe air pollution, hot, humid climates, cold, dry climates, climate changes. Singapore is equal to or worse than Hong Kong. And it's not part of the discussion. So whether the rest of the world applies, and we should take that into consideration, is something I think we have to give a hard look at.
There's two ways to look at this. Once you let the horse out of the barn, that horse has been out of that barn for 30 years. And if you're going to change a 30-year public policy, you better have something strong to base it on.
Well, I think that's what I'm going to say.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you, Bill, particularly appreciate you putting in the time and sticking with us till 4 o'clock in the morning. That's you get the prize for that for sure.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Alex and Alan, and appreciate.
Bill had a bad dream that he was at a Lasix farm in New York.
And Ed, thank you very much for your comments as well. And thank you, everyone, for your attention today, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.